Coming up on this week's RegCast.
Relying on checks is kind of like the car companies in the 70s relying on a quality department to catch the mistakes. And car companies realize they had to institute quality at every step. We have to have compliance at every step. It needs to be baked in.
I think we're just opening up that can of worms. I think the subject is relatively immature compared to quote unquote code. The model risk management regimes are much more mature. They're not just measuring this.
How do you know? How can I explain to the regulator or to my auditor that the algorithm answered this question at this particular time for this employee like this or like that?
There's certainly more to come. I think we're heading to a point where you're going to have the traditional financial services increasingly merge with some of the positive side of the decentralized finance. And what that all means for the future of capital markets is something that's going to be really interesting over the next several years.
Welcome to RegCast.
RegCast. Tomorrow's RegTech radar today. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 5. I am PJ DiGiamarino, founder in JWG, and welcome to RegCast, where we bring you tomorrow's radar today. And I think there's nothing hotter on the radar for a lot of folks than ChatGPT. It's causing an awful lot of concern, and the whole notion of what does it mean for the industry is starting to percolate through. We've had a great set of discussions that were really focused on trading and the compliance issues changing in the market. And I wanted to reflect on ChatGPT in the optic of what does it mean for the overall reporting agenda that we're moving into. We've had permission from our panelists on our last conference to be able to use this as a RegCast. So it'll be slightly longer than usual, but there are a lot of key points, and I'd just like to highlight a few of them for you. First, generative AI will have a profound impact on RegTech, but not in the way most people think. And that gets back to the understanding of the way the technology infrastructure works within the banks and the role of AI. There are many branches of AI already in use today. This is not a new technology. It's been out there for decades. We use machine learning for inference about data and patterns across a variety of uses. We use robotic process automation to automate repetitive tasks. We use natural language processing to create knowledge graphs of the facts in the way we want to model what's going on in our ecosystems. And really, all this technology sits together within any kind of financial institution in the form of proprietary applications for trading and portfolio management and banking accounts, but also a bunch of third-party tooling and third-party data. So ultimately, the databases and the infrastructure that's powering banking really needs to be thought of together with RegTech. And when we started talking about RegTech 11 years ago, always struck me as not a separate thing, but really integral to the way banking works. And think about it. Can you separate CRM tools for customer relationship management from banking technology? No, of course you can't. The information about your customer and all that metadata about where do they live and how sophisticated they are, that's going to drive an awful lot of decision making that has fundamental implications in terms of your compliance. But fundamentally, it's the business's information on the customer. The information that regulators want us to be working from are, get back to, well, how risky is the jurisdiction that they're in, and what does that mean for the money laundering rules? How sophisticated are they, and what kind of products can we offer them, and things of that nature. So this means if you're relying on ChatGPT to tell you what to offer the customer, it's going to have to strike a very fine balance between thinking about the business needs and the compliance needs. And there's a risk control point there that really needs to be understood and owned by the business. So ultimately, what a ChatGPT would have to do is really come to terms with all the policies, procedures, and controls, and really help get visibility to what's going on. And that could be revolutionary. Instead of having all these things stuck in PDFs, you could have people having conversations about what do they want to do. But as we learned in our 22nd of March seminar on trading, we have a bit of a data nightmare on our hands. In the last generation of tools, make the whole process of policies and controls and spreadsheets very unmanageable, very unwieldy, and that makes it difficult to pull together, well, what does good look like? And ultimately, common code is something that could help all the AI work out what does it need to do and put that control in the hands of the business. But ultimately, you need the provenance of all those decisions to be owned by the business, because all those rules are actually on the books today that say, as anybody who was in our MiFID working groups from 2017 knows, there are a whole bunch of microstructural controls to put in an algorithm and to test it and to make sure the logic isn't harmful. Reference the data that you used. In the prudential space, for the model risk management, we've had a whole bunch of controls in place for years as well. And all these controls are being extended. We have the European AI Act coming in that looks at, the riskiness of the application of the AI in banking. That means potentially anything involving credit could be something that falls in the scope as high risk, which would mean a whole bunch of new controls need to be documented, and the actually AI has to be tagged and shared with the regulator. So it's not just Europe. The US is doing other things as well, and all over the globe there's a slightly different approach. But ultimately, the writing's on the wall. These black box solutions are not going to work, and humans are ultimately accountable for all these decisions, and that regulators need to be able to audit that the decisions that they made are reflective of the rules that they establish for themselves, and they comply with the regulation. So in conclusion, this panel does a great job of bringing some of these key themes to life and some of the challenges that organizations have had making these moves towards using AI for better things and in better ways for compliance. But you can find a lot more in the supporting research notes for the actual conference itself. I'll drop some of the research into the RegCast so you can reference here, but also check out the conference website for the 22nd of March, as well as the 29th. And anyone who wants to register for those seminars is free. Please come on, and it's on demand for the 22nd until the fourth quarter this year. So coming up next, we're going to be widening our radar to be able to dive deeper into reporting. It's a really big pain point. There's all kinds of things going on, the trading space, prudential space, the post-trade space, ESG space. We have lots of new reporting efforts that could leverage these common pathways for the common domain model that we found, and be able to help deploy and get regulators comfortable with this whole notion of issuing code. Some of them are already there. Others are still thinking about it. Look for more details as we get up into the 29th of June, and stay tuned to this RegCast, because we'll be getting more out on this channel, and hope you enjoy what you're about to hear. Please like and review us on any platform you're there, and let us know if there's something that you like on your radar that I'd like to put on ours. Let us, we're all ears.
Welcome to the wrap-up, everyone. We want to talk about priorities. We've been doing lots of research with people on how they're thinking about moving to digital rules. And as a working group that's been running lots of collaborative groups over the years, we know that fear is a much bigger driver than greed when it comes to thinking about how you get to better RegTech. But there is a huge business case to be had if you can get the effectiveness and the efficiency up. You can really take, thousands of years out of the system that we all have to interpret what these rules actually mean, and hand off all the obligations between the first and the 1.5 line of defense and the second line of defense, and then audit in the third line. We've seen the introduction of the common domain model and digital regulatory reporting as a quiet shift in the way we can think about applying standards to these rules. Instead of big fat policy manuals, just give us the logic and we can work it out. But without the right tooling and compliance culture around that, it really doesn't happen. That just results in more fines, frustrated clients, and unmet growth targets as the business spends all their time trying to work out what it can and can't do, as opposed to just getting out there and doing it. So who better to help us go through this conversation than a newly minted compliance guy in a Canadian bank who's been a number of other places and has written a book On the very topic we're covering now, as well as done some computer coding in his last break, a legal and compliance lecturer who co-founded a RegTech company, a Reformed Trade Association junkie who leads policy for a top blockchain-based compliance and tokenization company, and a consulting heavyweight who now sits on the board of advisors for a digital assets and cryptocurrency association. Welcome all. David, why don't you kick off with a quick introduction of what you do?
Sure. Well, I've been at lots of banks, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Citi, and now at the Canadian bank you mentioned, but I'm here as my personal self and the author of a book coming out in the fall called Stop Harming Customers, a Compliance Manifesto. And as you mentioned, I'm also getting myself a master's in computer science because the connection, as you point out, between technology and compliance departments is a fraught one. And I feel like I need to learn more of their language on both sides to have the conversation to get us there.
And while you were taking this degree, ChatGPT came out, right?
It has helped me with a lot of homework.
Yeah, I would have thought you could just have it finish the course for you now.
It's fairly surprising. It didn't do very well in the machine learning class, though, I'll have to say. But in all honesty, that kind of model has proven, I think, ways that AI can really help compliance professionals, and you can communicate with them now about it in a way that they might not have understood before because they can see what it really looks like, what the opportunities are.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And Ralph.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Ralph. I'm a compliance and legal guy, and I've been working in the industry for more than 15 years in the financial industry as a legal and compliance professional. Today, I call that phase of my life as the traditional compliance phase because 6 years ago, together with colleagues, my fellow co-founders, we started APX. APX is a RegTech company, and we are doing non-traditional compliance. We call it embedded compliance. So what we do effectively is help banks to do compliance checks more effectively. And yes, I think we will cover some of those aspects later today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, and congratulations on sitting in Switzerland and being able to make this call.
Thank you.
Jackson.
Yeah, so for those who weren't on earlier, Jackson Muller, I'm a Director of Policy and Government Relations at Securency. We're a blockchain-based capital markets infrastructure technology company. And for the purposes of this call, automated compliance is something that is at the core of our focus and what we've been building since 2015. We are a US-based firm, but we are helping traditional financial services firms navigate kind of the complexities of the digital asset environment, but more specifically, providing them with white labeled solutions that allow for kind of this configurable multi-jurisdictional compliance framework that can embed into various tokenized assets, allowing the asset to travel to different multi-jurisdictional, different jurisdictions, and creating hopefully what we view as one global liquid market.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, PJ. So Adam Schneider, I sit on the advisory board of the Global Digital Currency Association, which is trying to help the digital asset world organize against kind of traditional and newfound compliance principles. If that wasn't enough of a rock to push up a hill, I'm an independent consultant and have helped any number of large institutions either think about what they should be doing in compliance or automate what they should be doing in compliance, or in some cases fix what didn't happen in compliance. So there's kind of a circle of life there that is, I think, fairly common, sadly to say.
Well, let's kick off this circle of life with the book that David wrote. And yeah, I don't think anyone can argue with stopping customer harm. You can't argue the negative of that statement. But what is it that really is the business case there, David, as you've dug into the whole discussion about fines and so some of the real things that are motivating the way that firms manage compliance? What's driving it?
So on two sides of that. On the one side, the whole fine thing isn't really working. And if I did an analysis of all of the fines over the past decade, against all the large financial institutions, hundreds of billions of dollars of fines. And as a percentage of their revenue, on average, it's 0.05%. So it's a bit like the UPS truck parking on double parking and having to pay a ticket. On the other hand, I'm going to say almost no one's coming to work looking to do a bad job or to harm customers or to break the law. It's certainly not at top management. And that culture of compliance has to flow from the top down. I think what we have created in the world is extremely complex with this 3 lines of defense model, and that the business still looks to compliance to just sort of solve it for me in many places, and that the change has to happen where compliance moves to the front line. Some places I've seen this start to happen, and that the compliance function really provides advisory service and oversight, but that it's where you're creating the transactions, where you're making your new products, where you're interacting with the customers. That's where compliance has to happen. And relying on checks is kind of like the car companies in the 70s relying on a quality department to catch the mistakes. And the car companies realize they had to institute quality at every step. We have to have compliance at every step. It needs to be baked in.
And by baking it in, I guess, can you separate what's an advisory, like, let me consult to you, Mr. Business, and what you should be doing, versus what's operational?
Yeah. So there's a lot of transactional type stuff, money laundering, checking, know your customer. And there's a lot of regulations that are fairly straightforward. File something in 30 days. And then there's the ones where there's questions. Is this going to be unfair, deceptive practice? And that's where compliance would come in to provide the advice and to say, yeah, that looks like something we are comfortable taking on as a company, which is also why I think compliance needs the right stature, not reporting into an operational risk or not reporting to a risk, not reporting to operations. Compliance should, like audit, if not being part of audit, report to the board, because compliance needs to be able to stop those products and services where it goes against the firm's policies. It goes against the firm's ethic. There's so much of a gray area on all of these rules, even on something that says file in 30 days. What's 30 days? Does it include the weekends? Does it include Japanese Arbor Day? There's 2 definitions of a business day in the U.S. letter banking regulations. You have to interpret, and that interpret needs to come from the top, not from the bottom of the organization. And what we've got running right now is you can interpret, the interpretation part can happen lower in the organization, and you can overrule or push over compliance. So that advisory role is really about making sure the company colors inside the lines that it has drawn from the top.
Yeah, love the analogy. Ralph, how do you see it?
Well, it's a bit boring, but I think I need to agree with David on the baking in aspect of it, right? I think I don't have to repeat. I think that's exactly what I've seen in my professional career within banks, right? I mean, we have tried to bake it in the past, but how did we do it, right? We provided our business colleagues with the PDF documents. Maybe we did once a year training and the certification, right? That was our type of baking the requirements into the business lines. And I think did it work 15, 20 years ago? Probably not. Does it work today where probably 100%, 80%, 90% of the client interaction is happening through digital tools? Obviously not, right? I mean, banks are using trading systems, advisory tools, travel management tools, CRM tools. Everything is basically a digital process, at least within large organizations, right? So I think for me, not debating should we bake in or not, I think absolutely clear, yes, that's the only way compliance can be achieved today. I think the question is how, right? And I think that's where I spend most of our time today, right? Helping banks really to bake it in, because it's not easy. It sounds easy. And I think I've never had a discussion with a bank where I explained that concept and the other side disagreed. I think everyone agrees that baking in or embedding or automating, however you want to call it, right? Those regulatory checks into business processes is not only the most efficient way to do it, right? It's also probably the safest way to do it. It's the right thing to do. But the question then is, okay, now let's do it, right? And what are the challenges? And I think the challenges are, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm sometimes a little bit critical about our profession, right? And I think we have been trained as lawyers to interpret text and discuss, and it always depends on certain things, right? So we like that kind of work of regulatory interpretation. And does this allow for baking into a CRM system or a trading tool? Well, obviously not, right? So I think the challenge is really, how can we do it? How can we help banks to achieve this, where the checks are automated, they're happening where they should be, right? If the relationship manager is sitting in front of the client, or the trader is just about to execute the transaction, but at the same time giving the legal and compliance experts the relevant oversight, right? I think that's easier said than done. It can be done, but it needs a really a little bit of effort. And like every effort, right, I think there must be an underlying strategy where someone very high up in the hierarchy says, this is what we're going to work on, this is what we're going to do. It's not the magic button and I press it today and then everything is baked in across the organization, right? Clearly not. So it's a process. It needs resources and it needs top-down visionary strategy to execute, right? So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I guess probably fascinating then, Jackson, if you to pick this up, because you start thinking about things like investor protection and all the rules they have to encapsulate around that for a digital asset that's traveling through different regimes and you don't even know what is classified as. It starts getting pretty complicated. How do you guys think about that with your compliance framework?
Yeah, well, PJ, without going too deep into this, we provide our partners with really a sophisticated tool set. And, we talk about, building in, these regulations. Well, it allows issuers of various tokenized assets to build into the actual smart contract what regulations they want to build into the actual tokenized asset, right? And that smart contract with the built-in regulations will then determine who the token can be issued to, where it can go, and ultimately, from a regulatory perspective, it allows for auditability, where they can come in, view the smart contract, view the built-in if-then statements that our technology provides for, to understand exactly how it is that the issuer built that code into the contract itself. And then it becomes certainly self-executing, and it can correspond to various multi-jurisdictional regulations depending on where the issuer wants to issue the token to. Now we could talk about this a little bit further, but we've engaged with multiple regulatory bodies, both in the U.S. and then internationally, showcasing cross-border transaction and policy enforcement and distribution control of the asset. We've also done a number of things as it relates to custody, control location, and transaction reversibility. And so the issues that we've been building towards, it hasn't been easy. I mean, we started this in 2015, and they're just coming to the part where we're beginning to productize a lot of these efforts. We're getting to the point where you can actually build in various regulatory rule sets from a low code, no code environment into these tokenized assets that ultimately will allow and determine where that token can go. So that is certainly a evolutionary step forward. We think, we think I'm being biased here, pretty unique in this space, but it's something that I think as regulators, and I've read this in various reports, they're talking about interoperability, scalability, how do you ensure that distribution control of the asset? This is stuff that, through various engagements with regulatory authorities, we've been able to showcase, to pretty positive feedback. So I'll stop there versus giving you an hour-long speech.
Well, but it's a next logical extension of how you take a compliance framework into a digital platform. And then, but I think that there's a lot of commonality between, I hear from the, Ralph and the way his platform works. Adam, how do you come at the business case then, TradFi, DeFi?
Thank you. So I want to start with, I really agree with David that the fine regime is not working, and that therefore it is much more about the design of the capabilities, of the design of the products. And you have to acknowledge that there are some bad actors out there who want to go through the compliance systems, and even though they nominally fail. And sometimes internally, there are actors who either do not understand or want to have marginal situations go through for their own or their corporations or their divisions' benefit. So it's a somewhat, crazy uncertainty type of environment. The good news about DeFi is that compliance is pretty low on the list as a practical matter until the regulators make it very, very obvious until recently. So I think there are better lessons in TradFi. I am somewhat optimistic that the AI capabilities that have recently come to play really have the opportunity to take some of the conversational pieces that are judgment and make them a little bit more consistent judgment. Like, wouldn't extended due diligence be better if it was done by an AI rather than by human beings scraping Google, which is actually how it mostly works? And wouldn't it be better if we had, a much smarter regime, given the amount of digital information that can be received, to go figure out what goes on? But is there a case for this? The last thing we need is rogue traders, rogue executives, rogue relationship managers, clients involved in things they shouldn't be involved in, customer losses. Acknowledging that probably someone 2 weeks ago said to their client, hey, you should buy Credit Suisse, is pretty cheap on the fundamentals, right? So acknowledging the fact that mistakes can be made and things in retrospect do not necessarily mean there are errors at the time of commit. And that line is hard to judge, sir.
Yeah, I guess there's always that question about how the AI makes those decisions, and how do you evidence the way that it was controlled. And I guess it becomes, to me, a bit complicated to think about that. David, you're studying this stuff. Do you have any perspectives?
Yeah, AI is statistics. We've got the marketing version of it, and then I took a machine learning class, and it was all math. It was all statistical math and matrix. So, and the problem is that you don't know how the model works. It is purely based on statistics of what it has seen in the past. There are ways to figure out what you have put into it and the weights they're based on. There are things called knowledge graphs, which have been around for a long time, which seem to be making a resurgence. In terms of the technology, I think for this audience watching, the first thing I would say is beware of magic pixie dust. If someone promises they can solve everything for you, then they can solve taking your money, certainly. I have seen lots and lots of solutions. I know what Ralph has is a good one, and I know how hard he works at it. There's a handful of others I would say that's true of, but again, the disconnect is what the technology people are talking about and what the compliance people are talking about. While they're using the same words, they're on different planets. Compliance people, and you need confidence that you're 100% correct. You can't be partially correct. And so AI can assist that and can help the people become faster. So much of what we do inside this company, every company I've ever worked at is, yeah, there's some data. And to get that data, we got to find the person who knows how to get at that data. We got to find the high priest. What AI can do is it can enable an internal search in the same way ChatGPT can go across all this other data and piece it together. It won't make it right, but it can show you where it's extracted from. ChatGPT is not a good example of not showing where it got its data from, hence some of the lawsuits about the image creation, not for ChatGPT, but for the other ones. But there are techniques and there are companies building things. And I would say when you talk to your tech teams, explain that you need to understand the provenance of the data. There's a whole history of data provenance, and use that word with them. That's a technical term for the SQL people. They'll understand what you're talking about. You need that provenance tied with the AI initial analysis that then humans can improve on.
Yeah, and it strikes me as we start talking more about compliance, the verb, it all gets back to that contextual data that we need to understand. These things people just kind of know actually need to get documented. How did I know that client was in the target market? It becomes a couple of data points that we all pull off various databases in our CRM system or wherever. But that is what's needed then to make it a straight through process, or to make the process and logic able to be evidenced. I mean, Ralph, you must see this in spades, some of the really complicated stuff you've been doing. What does it take for people to get from the way they think about compliance, before they engage you, to what they do when they're implementing your system?
It's I wouldn't say there is the one answer, right? Because I think there are some areas, obviously, when we embed compliance checks, right? Some banks simply didn't do the checks beforehand. So the users at the end, they're surprised that the system is checking something and here and there is blocking a trade, for example. And there are other cases, naturally, that really depends on the area, the department, and the process, right? And in other areas, obviously, I mean, this is a huge relief, because before there was a manual approval process, for example, right? Let's say disclaimer management, stuff like that, right? Where you create a marketing material, you work on it for hours, you send it to the compliance team for review, it goes forth and back. So I think there is not the answer to this. I think what is very, very clear is that from a compliance point of view, while often the initial concept and how to get to such an baked in approach needs some explanation, right? I think the more lawyers working in compliance, the more explanation it requires. I think once it's implemented, the positive aspects of it, I mean, they outweigh by far. It's obviously clear once you can track, right? Because that's at the end the compliance side of it, right? You can also track usage. You know exactly which product was traded, which instrument was advised, which travel occurred. You know it because there is a rule checked for every single interaction, and you actually have the automated check beforehand, plus you have the monitoring aspect covered as well. So I think that's the feedback once it's implemented. But very often, I think getting there obviously is the challenge. And maybe adding to what David was mentioning, right? I think I've been in my classes where I teach, we have been discussing AI for years, right? And I think there weren't that many applications where you could really say, well, now this is properly challenging the way we are going to work, until a few months ago, right? So for the first time, when I showed my students what ChatGPT can do, right, and how regulatory answers are pulled out within seconds, I mean, it's simply amazing. However, I think it's exactly this aspect of auditability, right? I think the algorithm is great. And I also believe that the chat interface will, to some extent, replace interfaces like the Google search, right? We will start to only ask questions in that format and not in the other format anymore. But now coming back to the compliance area, it's exactly this auditability, right? How do you know? How can I explain to the regulator or to my auditor that the algorithm answered this question at this particular time for this employee like this or like that, right? And I think that's exactly the challenge, and I'm absolutely convinced companies will come into that space and make, on the one hand, use of this, let's use it, the front end part, right? The chat as simply a policy front end, while on the other hand, providing then the compliance people with the relevant auditability and the tracking, and also basically improving the algorithm on an ongoing basis, right? But I think in our space, in the regulatory, the legal and compliance space, there will be always coexistence of AI-based feedback and, let's say, old-fashioned rules, because I'm not convinced that, let's say, a high-frequency trading system, you would actually hook up to AI-generated policy answers, right? I think you probably wouldn't do that. I think you would take the effort to properly transform and create rules, just to be 100% of the safe side if you execute thousands of transactions. While in other areas, and I think that's the areas where a lot of policy requirements are today managed in PDF files, I think in that area where today a banking employee would simply pull out a PDF, read it, do his own interpretation, and then act upon it. I mean, there an interpretation happens already today, and we probably would feel comfortable if an AI would make this interpretation even a bit more standardized than it is today. So I think, there is definitely room for that approach, absolutely, but it has still its challenges. Right?
Adam, what's your perspective? I get that you've had the Big Four experience in terms of the governance and the who owns the code and what responsibility do they have in terms of when they use either AI or other techniques around making compliance calls?
It's a very good question. I think you're familiar and all are familiar with the model risk management regime that goes on for evaluating financial models promulgated by the OCC and some others. We need that in this space, the equivalent type of regime around how do we think and measure about models? What are the critical things? What are the not critical things? What are the control structures? What are the outcomes? What is the provability before? What is the provability after? I think we're just opening up that can of worms. I think the subject is relatively immature compared to quote unquote code. The model risk management regimes are much more mature. They're not just measuring this. They're typically measuring bank, balance sheet, risk, heaven forbid, interest rate type of things. And I think that there are a lot of lessons to be transferred from one to the other in this space.
And some of these, like the EU AI Act and a few of the other regimes are starting to push into that space, right?
I'm not an expert in the EU side, so I need to defer, but I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Jackson, I guess you spoke earlier about your platform and how it would make some of those decisions. What kind of approach have you taken to architecting the code so it's evidenced how it's making decisions?
Yeah, we're not looking to become ourselves the largest legal law firm and providing, all the various rule sets to members of our partners. What we're doing is simply providing the tool sets that allow various institutions to come in and build various regulatory concepts into the token itself. And so it's through their legal teams, through their compliance teams, in building that regulatory structure that is then inputted into the token itself. So that obviously from our perspective, that allows the institution the freedom to build the regulatory rule set that applies to that particular token and where they want to go with that token and who they want to issue to. That gives them the freedom to do that. We simply provide them with various technical tools that actually are more, again, no code, low code. You don't need to know the ins and outs of coding to be able to put this all together. So it's a benefit to the institutions, and a lot of what we have done is certainly paying off with some of our partners. For instance, and this is public, our work with WisdomTree and their WisdomTree Prime app, and putting together a number of tokenized funds. I think the Digital Treasury Fund is one of the first that were approved by the SEC, and I think they have 8 others that have been approved since then. And issuance onto various distributed networks, so Ethereum and Stellar to begin with. But we are certainly providing kind of the background technology that empowers institutions to be able to issue various tokenized assets in a way that is compliant with the various regimes that the token finds itself in.
It strikes me, actually, Jackson, you say you don't want to be a law firm, but you actually have to host the law firm's advice. And
Sure.
that's not an uncommon challenge for anybody with these rule sets. Tell us about how you think about the different ways you get interpretation and onto the platform.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's up to the firm's legal counsel to use our technological solutions to build these regulatory tools, regulatory policies within the token itself, right? So ultimately, they make the decision as to their interpretation of what type of regulations matter for this particular issuance. And from that, then they're able to build through our technology the correct the correct rule sets. And if there is a problem, or if they want to test it out, or if they want, or if a regulator wants to come in and see what was the code behind that, or what did you use to build this technology, these rule sets, it's an auditable framework that allows them to come in and check exactly how the code was built, and exactly how it was inputted into the token itself. So there's there's greater transparency on the regulatory front. There's greater transparency from the institutional side as well, in building these rule sets. So that it is ultimately up to the issuing firm and their counsels and legal compliance teams to build the correct rule sets into the token. We simply provide the back end services that allow them to code those rule sets into the token.
I guess, David, in terms of the forward priorities in this space, your book ran through a lot of the good thinking about what it takes to get your house in order, and obviously these kinds of approaches could be part of that. How are you looking at the forward priorities for trading next 18 to 24 months?
I'm trying to get people off the idea of going out and collecting all the law and figuring out which law applies. I'm trying to go the other way and say, we are an institution. Let's go figure out what we're already doing. We already know what the law is. Let's go to the people who know which pieces they need, give them their data, and then connect it internally. Probably the most important thing to me is to stop the attempts to build one system to house everything, because that is a cycle that continues forever. We are never going to put all of our data into one GRC system. We're not going to have our payroll and our trading systems. So we have to get data from different places that lives with different taxonomies and different meanings and different business jargon. So my holy mission, as it were, is to get people to use the computer to join together data that will remain disparate, and we'll never get it all in one lake or one bog or one ocean or whatever they want to call the structure. We'll never get it all attuned to the same taxonomy. We'll never have one taxonomy. We'll never agree on what all the US states are, Puerto Rico, where it falls. We'll never agree. Let's stop it, stop having all those meetings, and use the computer to join the data. Use the semantic capabilities of a ChatGPT, of a Google, of all these technologies. Let's get some smart tools that lay across and let people do their work, and not create another corporate tax of another system you have to enter your data in that you don't use to operate in.
And this is where you were talking about the knowledge graphs earlier. Do you want to explain a bit more about what that means?
So knowledge graphs are widely used. Google, eBay, Amazon, everybody's got huge knowledge graphs with millions, tens of millions of entries. When you go to Amazon and you type shoes, that it knows that a sandal is a shoe, or that a clog is a shoe, or whatever. It understands the relationships. Those relationships can be stored in this knowledge graph. It's a representation of knowledge that you can know the facts in. That knowledge graph can then, and this research I've been doing, can then be tied into your AI model to train the neural network to say, here's what I know is a fact. A shoe and a sandal have a relationship. A loan and a mortgage have a relationship. Take those facts so that people can use different words. And when they say customer in the consumer business and they say customer in the commercial business, one is a person and one is a company. And we can let them go about their daily business without forcing them to change all the ways they talk about things. When technology risk wants to think in a certain way about FFIEC, when the trading desk wants to talk about things in Europe slightly differently from America, let them talk about it. And then we will get the data from the issues and the audits and the risk assessments and the policies and the procedures. The challenge isn't the outside data and the law. People know what the law is, and the challenge comes when they decide to get too close to the sun. The challenge is, what are my internal structures? How did I turn that law, like the fellow from Security was talking about, how do I turn that law into code that is some system that operates on my trading desk? How do I know where that connection is, so when the law modifies, I know which piece of code to go look at? That's the challenge, and that's what's all manual right now.
Yeah, and I guess that's what we've seen with the common domain model for the derivatives reporting. it doesn't matter whether it's a clearing timestamp or a clearing execution timestamp, whichever jurisdiction defines what it is. You just need to map it to your process, and then know what you're putting into that field, so that when one changes, you can then update it, and it just take all the pain out of it. But we use knowledge graphs ourselves just to be able to represent what regulators ask for, because they change terms all the time, and we think they're talking about similar concepts, so we just sort of tag them all together, let humans figure that out. But
That's
Ralph,
right.
how do you come at the forward priorities next 18, 24 months?
I think one of the priorities, or let's put it as an item on my wish list, and that's still something that I've been trying to convince our counterparts for quite some time now, right? I think priority should be and should remain having really a digital strategy within compliance, right? What is our compliance framework? Because our organizations are digital organizations, right? They already are, and they are turning more and more digital every day. And if we look at the space Jackson is working in, I mean, this is probably the most digital process end to end. So how can we still in some areas work with the traditional procedures that have been around, right? So I think first of all, my priority, my wish list would be not only do this as a marketing exercise, right? Having like a RegTech team somewhere, but or a head of compliance innovation, whatever it is, but really allocate budget and try to do it, and hire the right people, obviously, right? Because it needs people like David, right, with a good understanding of the regulatory side and the complexity which is there, and obviously some technical capabilities. And then I think on the other hand, I think what we are trying to do a lot is help our clients to look for the low-hanging fruits. And what are the low-hanging fruits? There are obviously those areas to bake in checks or whatever, however you call it, to make the compliance process more efficient. The low-hanging fruits are whenever you actually create value, right? Where at the end, there is ideally a business value, maybe it's a client value, where this is time savings, better service delivered, faster executed trade. It can be anything, right? And I think therefore what I'm teaching my fellow compliance students is also creation of a business case, right? I mean, how do you change something? Well, you can be very, very lucky and just get a 50 million budget assigned and you can do something with it. Probably the exception, right? The easier case is you create the business case yourself and say, look, I mean, if we bake in compliance checks into process ABC, this is the impact we generate, right? And the impact potentially build on compliance side as well, but mainly on the business side and on the client side. And your stakeholders and budget owners will for sure listen, because this is their own interest, right? To serve clients, to have the best products out there, provide best advice, trade faster than competitors. So I think those would be my two main items on the wish list, or what I think, what I would hope would be the priorities of the global heads of compliance.
Well, thank you, and I will take that as your wish. So we have to move to wrap up amazingly. Adam, what's your top wish for this space?
So I'd like to acknowledge that compliance is actually frequently successful. You just don't know it stopped something bad. And therefore, there's little in the way of accolade for the customer that wasn't misserved, for example. And when I think about that segregation, I'm drawn to some of the terminology. It comes out of my Deloitte days. What is the preventative side of things versus the detective side of things? So can we supercharge the preventative side to prevent problems versus the focus on detective after the action? And I would really like to see a serious focus on the preventative side, because I think we'd all be happier when all is said and done if compliance actually not only stopped it, but there was almost an ROI for what happened when we actually stopped the thing that should not be allowed to happen according to the various rules. And I've really never heard that paradigm played out that way.
That's a great point. It reminds me of my CAO at one of the banks I worked at telling me he just wished he knew how many shots on goal versus goals scored we had. We're spending all this money, but how does he justify, how many pucks didn't go in the net? David.
How many own goals have we had?
Oh,
That's the metric I'd like to see. I feel like there's a lot of them. Hey, my last thought is, I agree with Adam completely. Look, we always tend to look at the negative. There's a lot of positives going on. I think compliance is more empowered than it ever has been. And I think people understand every time the banking world shakes, people go, I get it. We need better compliance. And it's certainly come a long way. So let's keep going. Let's get the technology people helping us.
amen. Thank you. Jackson.
Yeah, I would just add on to that a greater understanding and recognition of the positives, right? And the willingness, I think, of regulators to step out in front and engage with various industry stakeholders to understand how this all will come together and what it's going to look like. And I think you're starting to see that slowly emerge. I'm thinking just off the top of my head with the Project Guardian on institutional DeFi, where you had JP Morgan working with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is a really interesting case study. And I think there's certainly more to come. I think we're heading to a point where you're going to have the traditional financial services increasingly merge with some of the positive side of the decentralized finance. And what that all means for the future of capital markets is something that's going to be really interesting over the next several years.
Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I guess I'll only add from a JWG perspective, last decade has been subsumed by a lot of reg talk. And we got to get back to the coalitions that want to collaboratively generate real common IP. And the thing I love about the trading space is that there's just so much value in getting some of this basic stuff right. And I think what would I like to see next 18 months is let's identify those things with those business cases and get the relevant stakeholders in a room to be able to get the right kind of digital artifacts. And I just will wrap up this seminar by saying thank you all for dialing in. We're soared well past 150 registrants as of the time this aired. We have the great capacity to be able to have this online for 6 months. So thank you for dialing in whenever and sharing it. So please let your colleagues know if there's one particular panel or even particular person, go ahead and ping them the details. We'll get them registered and they can participate as well. We've had 26 countries so far and 30 firms and trade associations combined. So there's a tremendous success, I think, in pulling this conversation together. It has been a bit disparate, but I certainly can see lots of connections between a lot of these topics. And I think there's some tangible stuff to work on here. We're going to go get back to some of the key stakeholders that will help us figure out what's on their radar and how we can actually help shape that business case. Look for more updates from us on the website and then our radar reporting. If you are interested in your own radar reporting, let us know because it's something we do deliver now out of Reg Delta. But ultimately, what we're looking to do for the next couple seminars like this year is to dive into expanding this conversation a bit wider. So we've had a good focus on the markets and the transactional trade and transaction reporting side. In the 29th of June, we're going to expand it to look more in detail at the prudential statistical side of things to pick up Basel 3, 4, and all that great discussion, pick up ESG in more detail and a lot of what's going on there. T+1 is another big theme. We're looking at how does that play in. So how do we think about reporting as a domain that can help bring a lot of this together? Like David said, take the many different perspectives on the facts in the industry and bring them together into some sort of common way. So those are the next couple. Look for details on those soon. Actually, the website's already up for reporting. If you go to the reporting, jwgevents.org, you can see a rough outline of it. And let us know if you want to get involved. We're talking to lots of people already about how to keep this going. So thank you very much for participating. And we will look forward not only to these virtuals, but also physical. We have a few physical events coming up this year. And we're looking forward to our big annual conference in February next year, 2024. Anyway, Thanks very much. Appreciate it. I'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also, I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library. This is RegCast.
Tomorrow's RegTech Radar today.